Hello and welcome to panel 3 of our 5th Streaming Media Connect virtual event. We're all champing at the bit to get back to in-person conferences, but these virtual events have given us the chance to keep the conversation going while we can't all get together. Hopefully we'll all be getting together again soon. If you're wondering where all systems go for Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach the first week of November, the program is live and we'll be adding speakers this week. Look for a link to the West website in the chat. I believe Steve Nathans-Kelly will post that there. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor for Streaming Media Connect, and that's Limelight Networks. Limelight Networks is helping us bring together this entire week's worth of events, well, almost a week, 3 days worth of panels and presentations for you. All of our events will be archived and available on the streamingmedia.com website when the event is over, so look for that. I'd also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Encoding.com, and Jeff Malkin from Encoding.com is going to be joining our discussion on the challenges and opportunities presented by moving your workflow to the cloud. If you have questions for our panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and the panelists will answer them live during the session or at the end of the hour. Also, if you're here, and if you're here at the end, you're eligible to win a $50 Amazon gift card. You must be present to win, and we'll be announcing the winner of that at the end of the session. And with that, let me welcome Magnus Svensson, our moderator. Magnus is the media solution specialist at Eyevinn Technologies, and he's been a regular fixture at our streaming media events for a few years now. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Eric, and happy to join this conference yet again as a moderator or panelist. I think I've done most of it at the moment, so this will be an excellent panel, I believe. I usually say that, but this is probably the one I'm looking forward the most in for the last 2 years. Actually, I think we have a great lineup, and we have a great lineup of questions that we will talk about. So I think my biggest challenge this panel will be that I have 2 Jeffs on the panel list. So it will probably be my biggest task to keep them apart from each other. So, but maybe we should start with introducing myself. I'm Magnus Svensson. I work as a solution architect or solution specialist at Eyevinn Technology, a Stockholm-based independent streaming technology consultancy company. So I'm helping with streaming technology expertise across the world. So the cloud migration, let's start with the panelists we have on this call, and let's start with Jeff Malkin from Encoding.com. Tell me a bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jeff Malkin here. I'm president at Encoding.com. We've been around now for a little over 13 years. We were a pioneer early on in leveraging cloud computing to actually migrate content prep workflows from on-premise environments into the cloud. And today we power mission-critical, high-volume workflows for large media and entertainment companies around the world. So there is we've helped hundreds of companies make this migration. We have a lot of experience in all the things that you can plan for and many of the things that you can't plan for. So happy to share some of those experiences today.
Looking forward. So let's try to keep the Jeffs apart and let's take Maxim in between. Maxim Levkov from Crunchyroll. Short introduction.
Hi, I'm Maxim Levkov. I'm a principal engineer and architect at Crunchyroll. We are premier anime site, and I lead a technical video infrastructure team and at the Crunchyroll, pretty much making sure that all the content that is coming in and distributed and protected is within confinements of our team, and also does well for the audience. So I'm wherever you are, welcome to this panel.
Thank you, Maxim. And finally, Jeff from LiveSports. I actually think you're producing at the moment.
I'm actually not on site right now. I let the guys handle it. But yeah, this is Jeff Kethley. I'm with the LiveSports. I'm based out of Texas, and we provide live sports production all over the U.S. mostly, but we are worldwide also in many of our events, both North America, South America, and abroad, beyond. What we have been doing for before COVID is moving our infrastructure and our production infrastructure into the cloud, and that's been a favorite project of mine, to say the least. But we've been able to do it very well, and it's moving beyond just switching video or just doing simple things in the cloud, but we are actually doing camera control through the cloud, and it's definitely changed our workflows for the better over the years.
Thanks a lot. I think, like you hear, it's a very diverse and very experienced panel I have, and I think we're covering all angles of moving into the cloud. So my first thought was that we should try to define very quickly what is the cloud migration from the different angles. And maybe Jeff Kethley, can you start with your production, moving production into the cloud and what that would mean?
Sure. For us, we're in sports. There's a system called a REMI system, which ESPN started years back, and their idea was going from point on the ground, encoding those sick cameras, sending them up to usually by satellite muxed satellite feeds into their MCR back in Bristol, and then they would do a mix there. We took that about 3 years ago and moved things around a little bit. We kind of approach things a little bit more hybrid. So we actually do some of the heavy lifting is on site, because our workflow on site is a 4K workflow. And so that means all our backbone, everything there is captured and done in 4K, but we don't bring those 4K feeds back into the cloud or into the MCR. We're actually manage them on site. So at first, that was our first approach. Then as technology got better, definitely for sure, we're using Sienna processing engine in the cloud, and also the VisVector Plus from VisRT to do the mixing, along with the sweetened audio coming from a Mixbus platform. And so we're actually able to do every bit that we could do on the ground or at the MCR in Texas. We could do every bit of that now in the cloud. So we're doing the real production in the cloud, and then from that point distributing it out.
Cool. And Jeff Malkin, you're coming from a little bit different angle, but still moving things from on-prem hardware to the cloud, and your experience there, and then maybe you can give your overview of what cloud migration means.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, we were just talking about another conference earlier, but we had a quote on at our booth a couple of years ago that was something like, we will never spend another dollar on VOD infrastructure, says the CTO of every major media company in the world. And the reasons are that there are some powerful advantages of migrating to the cloud. I mean, everyone has the same challenges when you are preparing content for streaming services or broadcast, whether it's maximizing your viewership, making sure that the video looks good and works on all these devices and platforms, and captions work and audio works, and you're dealing with spiky volumes, and you're dealing with security and so forth and so on. And so when looking at solutions where you're migrating to the cloud, you obviously have to be solving those issues. And what we have found is that a big change for companies' mindsets as they do this migration is that there's a very big difference between working with shrink-wrapped software on infrastructure to the living, breathing software as a service world. And the requirements are constantly evolving. And so when doing these migrations and thinking about it and planning, you really want to kind of imagine that you're working with partners and vendors that can future-proof your workflows, that can very quickly adapt new features and capabilities as it's constantly changing. So it's really a lot about it is the tech and the feature side, and making sure that there's architectures that can quickly adopt new features, whether you build yourself or use a vendor. Or there's the human side, whether it's working with people who've had this experience, who sort of you don't know what you don't know, but hopefully your partner knows a lot what you don't know. And I think that's really becomes a critical piece as you're looking to migrate.
Cool. Finally, Malkin, I think you're Maxim. Sorry, I think you have a little bit broader scope and than the other two, but still moving things from on-prem to cloud.
Yeah, definitely. For us specifically, we have a growing audience and certainly a very niche audience, and actually expanding. We've moved, and even better, we have a globally, locally accessible audience, so that we have what we needed to do is basically to have all the languages, all the subtitles, all the audio available to the local audience as if they're sitting in that part of the world. And that gets more difficult if you have a regionalized architecture specifically servicing out of a data center, for instance, out of one part of the world, because that person is no longer able to traverse the network locations across the world fast enough for them to view the content locally. So you then have to sort of deal with a lot of those issues for speed of last mile. So going to the cloud was one of many possible avenues, and actually the only avenue to some degree. And for us, and as we sort of expanded and evaluated various options, our audience grew and the needs became more obvious that we needed to stay expandable, and that provided us the possibility to just sort of grow and service faster, better, improve on the quality, improve on the errors, improve on which sort of happen here and there, and service the audience, in more a better quality of service, I would say.
So for someone starting from today, like let's say we have a listener to this panel that sits with a data center today and want to move. So what would be your number one advice, Maxim, for that company?
Well, I think it's sort of understand the audience. If you're there are obvious reasons why you're sitting in the data center. So you might have started early and you kind of had to control your own infrastructure, but as you grow, your needs no longer able to expand within, adding an extra bucks of computing or adding extra firepower to a firewall, because all of a sudden the costs no longer provide you the ability to do this. So one thing you could do is when you move to the cloud is be nimble, be able to think in the cloud terms, and that is significantly different than thinking in the DC terms, where you're confined to one box, to several boxes, to hardware. Cloud is mainly and mostly API driven, so that moves your programming model entirely to a different structure. You're adding things in places where you would normally not add, or you're subtracting things in places where you would normally have things. And so that gets into a completely different state of architecture, infrastructure, and the cost concerns. So,
Jeff Malkin, you have been helping a lot of clients moving from data centers and hardware to the cloud. What's your main advices and pitfalls to avoid?
And I think for the companies that we work with, large media and entertainment companies, the benefits of migrating to a cloud operation are pretty obvious on managing scale, managing global distribution, dynamic scale, and flexibility of adopting new features, et cetera. So it really comes down to the unexpected that will arise often and always. So we tend to support companies that have very complex workflows that include transcoding, adaptive bitrate packaging, automated QC, dynamic advertising insertion, DRM, etc. And along the way, there are going to be lots of different things that you didn't expect. And I was thinking through before the call this morning, just a couple of examples that I can share with that. But one that came to mind was recently we were helping a large media company in the US launch a new broadcast content prep workflow. And as it was built and as we were sort of in the POC stage right before launch, the customer realized that they were receiving content from their various content partners where the audio was just really, there was a lot of issues where the audio wasn't unified. There was loudness differences. There were some audio channels that were muted, and so they relied on us very quickly to build a set of new features that where we could actually detect that and then repair that. And because we were able to do that, they didn't have to go and reject a whole set of content that they would they were going to have to if they hadn't either thought that through beforehand, which they didn't, or had an architecture or a partner that would be able to solve that. And just very recently as well, we have another streaming service provider, a monster, that is now launching internationally. And as Maxim was just talking about, you now are dealing with audio and subtitles in different languages so that you want to maximize your audience, right? So rather than the customer wanting to have to retranscode or repackage all of their content, which is 20, 30,000 hours of content and growing for each different country in each different language, they asked us to build a set of features that allow us to take an intermediary format and then repackage from there with the different audio or different caption files or subtitle files or whatnot. So really it's about when planning this move and making this move, it's either designing yourself or working with vendors who have architectures in place that can quickly add new tools to meet these ever-changing, evolving requirements, because you can't predict what those are coming into it, but they will appear, and they appear often. So I think that's really a critical component, and a really, like I said earlier, a different mindset from working with shrink wrap software when there's a bug and you report that bug and they say, great, we'll add it to our product roadmap, and 6 months later, be available, versus working with a cloud-based software as a service that turns it around in 3 days.
Yeah.
Right. And that whole world has changed. And if you're a vendor out there, you need to be thinking of that too, right? Because you need to be able to do that from a competitive perspective as well.
Yeah. And adding the live complexity into this, Jeff, Kethley, what dynamics will that bring you, and what are the challenges with the live element of this?
Well, live always has its own set of challenges, to say the least. One of our biggest advantages that we found with the cloud side, though, is that we are able to be more nimble. So if they do come to us, much like Jeff mentioned, and said, oh, by the way, we need another transmit going to this location, and we also need that transmit to have a second set of languages with it, or third, fourth, five, whatever number, it always changes. That's where the cloud for us has just made it makes it so much simpler to do it there. It's like, okay, I'll spin up another machine, create the audio paths that I need, and we're going. Where it's that fast, like within minutes, not even hours. And that's kind of the big thing of being flexible, is what we find the cloud does for the live environment, especially too.
Interesting. What I assume that large file systems and these type of things sitting in the cloud compared to having it on-prem will also come with challenges when it comes to the live element of with the cloud and getting things into there and out of it again.
Yeah, we're still faced with the same challenges of getting content from the ground up to the cloud. And that first mile, last, whatever, wherever you want to put that mile, it's still the hardest part, but it's getting easier. Things like SRT that really came into into fruition really large in the last year, especially during pandemic, that was a game changer for us, being able to have reliable sources timed together, whether it's hardware based, like our favorite High-Vision or Matrox encoders, or LRT based with our LiveView partners. Those sync signals are there in the cloud, but then it's easy to store it. And that's a beautiful thing too. I've got archives that go back years and years and years. I've never had a copy on the ground. It's all there.
Yeah, it's all there. It's yeah. So Maxim, when you started your journey, where did you start, and what would be the first thing you start moving into the cloud when it comes to the end-to-end workflows that you're working with?
So we had so we were in a data center for a long time. I think at certain point we had audience that was growing faster than our the needs of our audience were growing faster than our infrastructure would facilitate. So we basically moved piece by piece over some period of time, so it's not disruptive. I think the key to it is to keep it at the pace that it's not disrupting your business, and that's because you can't just like, hey, I'm gonna shut down DC and turn this thing back on. You just go piece by piece. But what sort of the kind of when you move from DC, we particularly our team. The video infrastructure team, but we have other, the operations, the content operations, and we have other many teams that service the audience. But video infrastructure team, we moved the transcoding piece, and we started transcoding in-house, which is we've always done in-house for a number of reasons, but when we were in the in the data center, just not enough boxes available, and when you move to the cloud, all of a sudden you have a lot of boxes available, but you're still under a same data center model. So we started re-architecting, rethinking how we're going to approach our architecture, and that was the I think that was the bulk of the effort. And then once we felt confident that everything is sort of going through the cloud pathways, and then we're fairly resilient, we started turning things off in the data center. And of course, having a deadline helped, and that and then obviously, when you have the last box done, you're sort of done. But that's where we're at. And then as we were in the cloud, your imagination is sort of your limit. But then we kind of found that there's some limitations to our thinking, and we had to make adjustments as we went, and that gave us a lot of possibilities. And that was sort of over following year sort of enabled for us for a global audience.
Jeff Malkin, what are the biggest pitfalls to avoid when moving your VOD transcoding to the cloud?
Biggest pitfalls. Well, it's I would say, it's sort of reiterating some points, but it's really about it's a shift in mindset. So first, when we're talking to customers who haven't yet really migrated to the cloud and they're still in that fixed amount of compute mindset, the first aha moment I usually find with clients is when they realize, oh, so we can process 10 or 1,000 or 10,000 files in parallel. That's something they're not used to, and things. So that there's a change and a shift around managing spiky volumes and whatnot. I think it's the pitfalls are really around thinking that we design a system that will replicate what we're doing on-prem in the cloud, and that's going to take advantage of all the cloud, the pros that bring to the table, but also that system's just going to run as is, for a while, that we're not going to have to maintain enough to continue to evolve it. On-prem systems tend to evolve quite a bit slower. And I think that really is, if you go into it knowing that that's the case, it's going to really improve how you expand, how you efficiently operate your platform over time, and that comes from an architecture, right? So obviously, as a vendor, I believe that you should why build it in how you should outsource it to those who've been doing it in export. But if in any event, building it yourself or outsourcing it, you need to really understand that the architecture you're working with is very expandable. It can be future proofed. New, we constantly have new transcoding formats, caption formats, audio formats, DRM formats, different ad networks, different ad platforms, different forensic watermarking platforms, etc. Right? And as you evolve, your system needs to be able to adopt those quickly and continually add new tools. So if you come into it thinking that it's this expanding, living, breathing system, then I think that's going to be a much healthier approach. Again, whether you build it yourself or work with vendors that way, rather than sort of just thinking of it as, oh, I'm moving my, what's in my data center into the cloud and it's going to run more efficiently. And I think if you really come to it as the shift in thinking, that's really probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I think when we talked last week, Maxim, we also was into the same type of thinking when it comes to the tools and the workflows and the way of working. Shifting into the cloud is not just moving what's running in the data center to a cloud somewhere else. It's a different way of thinking. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, indeed. So when you're in data center, for example, say you're sort of confined to I don't know, 10 rack cabinets, for example, and whatever you fit into 10 rack cabinets, you sort of work within that. But then you grow, and then you're like, oh yeah, I got to fit one more thing in there, and all of a sudden your power bill exceeds and you're in completely different state of affairs. Now and that's a model of capital expenditure, right? Because you have to now justify 10 years of the cost that you have for that particular I don't know how many, $10 million, for example, of your expense. Whereas if all of a sudden, when you move to the cloud, you move all of it, and then your cost per hour, per minute, per second is operational expenditure. And then you can scale and shrink as fast as you want or as slow as you want. And that justifies a completely different architecture. So, and when for case in point, we wanted to build local responses to global audience, and we've became aware of this ability on the edge compute capability. So you couldn't. So what you basically do is when a request comes into our system, we look at the request, we decide what to do with it, whether we pass further into the system or we respond in place, meaning like we respond right away from that location, from that region of the world, if we have enough information about the request. And if you think about what you would have to do in order for you to facilitate this, if you were continuing to operate within a data center, this would be a magnitude of 100x, just easy. Whereas if you're moving in the cloud, all of a sudden this capability is available to you if you're thinking about the architecture, because someone else has built those type of data centers globally and made it available for you to take advantage of. And so when you build, now you're not only building software, but you're building business rules. And building business rules is a lot more expressive than just building within the confinements of one particular location that you have to service. And you still could continue to service out of that location, but if you continue to evolve and but now you have resilience, you have a global failover, you have local acting systems that are looking like their next door neighbor as far as the response time concerned. And that is I don't know how many magnitude of far more expressive and capable for costs that are well outweigh the data center. And I think that's sort of the thinking that changes as you move into the cloud, at least for us.
We'll come back to the cost things, because I think we also have questions from audience around cost, but I would like to continue with the workflows and the way of working a bit more with Jeff Kethley, and what has changed in your way of working when producing a live event from the traditional hardware infrastructure to the cloud. Has something changed for the personnel working with the event?
Absolutely. The biggest change for us is now I can use what we call the A team. The top of all our people, it could be spread out throughout the country. Now they don't have to, I don't have to travel them if they don't want to, or if they don't need to, or if they're booked back to back, especially in the freelance world, where you use a lot of technicians that are freelance. And so instead of me having to worry about, it's like, well, you can't work this job because you have to travel the day before, or you're back to back with something else. If they're nearby and they have their internet access at home or at their offices, they can log in and perform their job from pretty much anywhere. As we've talked about in chat jokingly, it's like, Jeff, where are you calling from this time? It's like, I do that. I literally do drive down the road, and it's like, oh, a client calls, and if I need to work on, I'll pull over and log on through TeamViewer or whatever remote access we have available to us. So now it's changed the workload of how people work, or workflow of how people work. So you're not tied down to just that one person sitting in front of that one piece of hardware. That one person could actually be managing 4 or 5 different pieces of the whole solution. They're not tied down to just that one piece to do. And they're not having to be tied to one location. They could be managing multiple events in multiple locations. That is another huge, huge thing. And by putting it all in the cloud, it makes it accessible for everybody, because all the infrastructure in the cloud, between all the softwares, between all the computers, between all the pieces, all that is working in the cloud at an unbelievable speed that we can't get if we were doing point to point with devices, talking to devices across remote locations. And if that person in Kansas happens to drop their internet connection, the second person that's looking over his shoulder or working simultaneously in Miami immediately is right on the top of it. So we're not tied down to just that one person or one workflow of coming up from the ground. We've got backups upon backups and people upon people that could help. We never have a break in the session. We never have a break in our actual performance.
Anything that's been harder moving to the cloud than earlier, or is everything just positive gains?
For us, it's been very positive. The costs have probably been the hardest part to manage, but that's just a matter of time as you learn more and more about it. As Maxim was saying, is like, by using the areas around the world, because we do worldwide events, that allows us to have a better experience for them, because they can come. I've got remote operators in Dubai that can come online, and as soon as they hit the Amazon backbone, it's just like they're working side by side with us. And that is just, it's a phenomenal feeling whenever you can have that collaboration from anywhere. And I would say the costs are probably, the hardest thing to get your head around. But once you are able to do that and create those workflows that allow you to spin machines up and down, you can be very cost effective with it also. Not just saving, everybody thinks, oh, the travel right off the bat when it comes to working remotely or distributed workflows. Travels, that's a small piece. For me, it was about giving my crew more quality of life, so they don't have to travel as much. They could stay at home and still work wherever our trucks happen to be, anywhere in the US or North America for that matter. They're still working on that truck side by side. I've got a guy back in Texas right now that's working with my same crew that's here. And it's just like we're sitting side by side, because they're all on comms. What does it matter if he's on comms down the hallway or if he's on comms across the country? It doesn't matter to us.
Interesting. Jeff Malkin, coming back to cost, you're a vendor in the providing cloud infrastructure. Where is the breaking point? And if you're a small streaming service or a small needs, where does it start to gain in the cloud? Is there a break point, or is it where's the
well,
final?
there's I mean, there's a couple of facets to that answer. I mean, one is around I would call it features and capabilities for most of our clients, large, medium, or small. I mean, the pace of innovation in our space is very rapid. So a key reason for not investing in transcoding infrastructure, hardware, software, is because your hardware and software is outdated long before the cost is fully amortized, right? So that is certainly a key driver. And I think, another key driver around cost, it really just has to do with what kind of volumes. Are you dealing with spiky volumes? Are you a news, media outlet where, so you have infrastructure that supports, the peaks. So therefore it's underutilized for a good use of your time, or the opposite. You're at the trough, but then when news peaks, you're very slow to be able to get your content out in market, which is a competitive disadvantage. So I think it's really when it for the larger media and enterprise and entertainment companies, it's more about that the not being able to amortize the cost of that infrastructure because the requirements are changing so quickly. And then there's other, as you move to the cloud and your ecosystem partners are in the cloud, and you move storage into the cloud and your CMS is in the cloud, and then your transcoding and packaging workflows are in the cloud, and then you're doing play out from the cloud. All of a sudden, you're not moving content in and out of the cloud, so you're not worrying about the cost of ingest egress, and that goes away. So and cost of storage in the cloud is getting cheaper and cheaper. So, but I think the initial driving point for transcode infrastructure to the cloud has to do with CFOs looking at this and seeing the continual investment in infrastructure that's continually behind the 8 ball. So that's been a key driver.
Yeah. Maxim, I think you talked about freedom and endless capacity, but that comes with a carefulness of cost control. And then how have you managed that? And what's the challenges with keeping the cost in the control when it comes to the cloud?
I think it's sort of learning various nuances. For example, you might have one model that everyone defaults to, and that's the model you sort of drive around, and then all of a sudden you go, oh wait, there is an additional component that sub parameters that I can control that allow me to say, move my storage to lesser, expensive state. And so consciously thinking about where you are and very actively participating in your day-to-day operations and understanding where you're standing will actually give you edge to your cost controls versus just blindly, confining to, a data center model. So the data center model basically says, hey, here's a storage, I have it sitting there, and it really costs me only, X amount of dollars, and that's the cost. With the cloud model, you go, okay, I have this particular file, and it's sitting there. I don't touch it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, even better, 180 days. Why do I have to pay for, for such a great resilience where I can simply put it, to cold state, and I can retrieve it, I don't know, 6 months or once in a lifetime of this file, and then my cost is whatever that multiplier is, less of highly resilient. And that's significant. When you times that the amount of files you have, all of a sudden your cost savings make sense. Then also thinking about how much of your compute really requires certain type of compute instances, like writing software that's not written for one platform, write software that's written for multiple types of CPU instances, or write that and compile for multiple types, and then you have a pool of different systems, and then you, or even better, if you have fractional systems that don't require a use of one instance that sits there for hours on end, maybe all you need is 2.5 minutes of processing time. Well, spin it up for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, pay for it on even seconds, pay for it, spin it down, control it. And it's the conscious state of mind and very active participation in the cost control that really is going to give you this edge. And then, move to the edge if you have to, if your system allows for it. Build architecture, inward, upward, like it's sort of, your cone is in the one location, you build the resilience within that location. And then you go, and you sort of build the audience support subsystems and break them down and then fully utilize what is available to you before you actually go and build things within your software. So sometimes people overbuild capabilities within the software just so that they can facilitate the needs. But if you really look, maybe there is you don't need to build an API gateway within your particular software. You just utilize it, and then you have a resilience in the facilitation of requests better. And that's model that's different than data center.
Yeah, I was gonna just add to that because you just touched on it. So imagine your current system, and when in a VOD transcoding workflow, you have lots of different tools, transcoders, packagers, DRM, watermarkers, et cetera. And then you're managing different versions of all that hardware and software, and versus being able to send an XML or JSON based job payload to a cloud platform that is managing all that for you, and all you're doing is spitting it out on the other side. And most customers don't care how that sausage is made, right? You just want it coming out on the other side, high quality, low cost. And no longer are you managing hardware and software and versions of that software. And it's the job of the vendor in this case, or to be upgrading all of that, and all you're doing is modifying your XML code or your JSON to take advantage of the latest and greatest. And that in and of itself, a cost perspective and an operations perspective is very attractive with migrating to the cloud.
Absolutely, and it's something you probably don't see on the bill directly, but it comes with it. So, Maxim, you touched upon the edge. What's your experience of? I know you have moved a lot of logic and coding out to the edges, and what's your experience with that?
So we've about 2 years ago, we've sort of toyed around with an idea of so a little bit about our audience. We have two type of audience, or it's the same audience. Sometimes they sort of migrate into different states depending on what they desire. So one is an ad service based, where you can watch anime content, and then at the same time, you watch ads that go along with it. So the sponsors of the ads effectively pay for you watching the content. And then we have a premium audience, the ones that are subscribers. They pay for a certain amount of dollars a month, and they get no ads. So when we decided to help the subscriber, the ad based side of the business, we have embarked upon this journey of server side ad insertion, and that's kind of slightly different from client side, because we're no longer facilitating the ads from the client side. We're just basically putting things together as a one seamless session for on the server side. So the server acts as a client, a de facto client, and then it provides the output to the to the player to consume. That sort of created an interesting series of challenges for us that we kind of experimented on at first, and then we fully embarked upon and fully supported for the edge. And for that particular group of customers, and we decided that we're going to use the edge, compute edge capabilities to actually facilitate this. We created server-side ad insertion and literally the entire ecosystem within the edge compute environment, and we facilitate the requests, we respond to requests, and we respond to the audience as if the audience is sitting local to, say, I don't know, if the person is in a European region. We don't go in the past, we would have gone all the way to United States, made whatever decisions internally, and then we would respond back to the user. But if you think about it, you're operating within what is called a network time. It's a physical transmit of data across, water boundaries and physical boundaries, but you have also physical constraints within this. So your objective then becomes to reduce that network time, because you don't want a person sitting there for 2.5 seconds, because you're sort of traversing the network across the world physically to facilitate the response. You want milliseconds response. So the only way you can do this, if you shift the mechanisms outward, and what your infrastructure, common infrastructure, becomes your globally reachable, and then the individualized infrastructure becomes regionally facilitatable. So your customer comes in, you process it, and then you respond right there and then. And that was our, I think that was sort of our, technical finding that was really amazing for us, and provided us what we could have not done otherwise, without being on the edge or regionally distributed.
Interesting. Jeff Malkin, should we only be in one cloud vendor, or should we be multi-cloud agnostic, or how what's your experience there? I know you're running in multiple clouds and multiple instances. So what's your multi-cloud experience?
Yeah, good question. Well, we operate in about 20 different data centers, cloud data centers around the world. And to continue on with Magnus's point, in our case, it's about being able to ingest and process content locally to any geography around the world, so you don't have to send content across the pond, et cetera. So for speed and cost efficiencies, that's been great. The multi-cloud is interesting. We have found in our experience that our largest clients are interested in encoding.com being more than just Amazon cloud-based. But I mean, often it's more political than it is technical, meaning, Amazon Prime is a competitor to a lot of our clients. And so, that becomes an interesting, I guess, we all deal in that world. But from a technical perspective, we have had, great success running on Amazon for many years. We run on Azure, we run in our own data center. We on OpenStack, we run in several client private cloud implementations as well. So it's really, a lot of it comes where you're storing your content, but even that, if you're storing it in one cloud, you can still ingest it into the other, and there's only the cost of egress in doing that. There's no cost of ingest into the other cloud. So I think what we were all hoping, I think, in the market was that, and it is happening, is that, the multi-cloud wars is, causing pressure to reduce compute and storage costs and other value-added service costs. And I think that's a real value. But from a individual customer perspective, we don't see a lot of requests that it's important that we operate in 2 different clouds. And, a lot of that comes down to, redundancy and what happens if a certain region in one cloud goes down. And we have a lot of systems in place that if AWS East went down for whatever reason, we'd be routing jobs to the next nearest data center, and clients may not even, we wouldn't even know that if they weren't going to our status page, right? So if you have redundancies in place, which I'm sure most do, then it's not, the multi-cloud is really about economic pressure on driving prices down rather than an individual client saying, it's important to us that you operate in 2 different clouds.
And how hard is it to run multiple clouds? Is it a huge effort to adapt to a specific cloud, or is it a fairly simple exercise?
No, that's another really good question. I think that the initial port of your code from one cloud to another, can be depending on how complex your platform is, 3 to 6 month engineering cycle. So it's not small. However, we have found that the more complexity occurs when you're trying to maximize the costs around managing the other clouds. So for example, spinning up and spinning down instances may not be efficient in one cloud as it is in the other, which, as Maxim was talking to earlier, is critical. Like for us, we have to be able to spin up instances in seconds. And when we migrated to one cloud at one point, it was taking 1.5 minutes to spin up an instance. I can't operate a business on taking 1.5 minutes to spin up an instance, but we didn't know that until we ported the cloud, ported our code and then started doing that kind of testing. And then you work to manage that more efficiently, or work with the company itself to resolve that issue. So I think the initial port is a finite project, but the ongoing maintenance, and as you're doing different branches of your code, and then you're having to manage that across different cloud platforms now that have different APIs for spinning up and killing instances and so forth, it does become complex. So, think hard about how important that truly is to your business and how necessary that is.
Interesting. Jeff Kethley, security has been a concern sometimes moving to the cloud and everybody can access it and all these type of things. How do you see on security, and how do you secure that no one accesses your live streams that are not entitled to?
Well, our outgoing streams have their own destinations. I would be more concerned actually with what is happening for getting control of our devices or our actual machines in the cloud. We use VPNs extensively, and we're very, very conscious about that, making sure that certain ports aren't exposed. Finding an IP address is so easy to do now. And even though you try to do your best to hide behind things, there are people out there that they just like to mess with you. So we do our best to mitigate that as much as possible, and we take all the necessary steps we can. Our outgoing streams, one of our largest clients is a gaming company. So overseas, for those that are US based, there's companies over there that provide video as a means to bet, and those gaming companies are very strict about how it goes out there. But it's crazy that we monitor that. It's no matter what we do, and we deliver it and we do everything we possibly can, it still shows up on those offshoot websites that it's not supposed to. And I'm like, that's my content. 5-10 seconds later, that's my content. And there's nothing I could do about protecting it. We do the best we can. And that's all we can possibly do right now, unfortunately.
This panel has been a lot of positivism around cloud and everything like that. Are there anything that are not suited for the cloud?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
I could definitely answer that.
I figured you had something.
The biggest thing, and this is where people that are new to the cloud don't quite understand. At first they say, oh, $2 a minute for an instance. But when you add up all those minutes that turn into hours, that turn into days, that turn into weeks, that turns into months, it's not a perfect solution for every application. For us, we do, in our live sports, we do a lot of professional tennis. So we're on site for 10 days at a time. So our cloud bill for 10 days can be very substantial if we're doing multiple, because we'll do multiple courts across that tournament. And some of that, it was in the cloud, some of it's on site, some of it's off premise. The difference is, do you need it to run all the time? And that's about how your workflow is and what you're designing and how you're doing your business. But if you only need it to run for, say, a football game on a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon, and you only need to run that infrastructure for 6 hours, It's very cost effective at that point because I could duplicate that and do it again and again and again and again with the same exact workflow of how everybody logs in, how everybody sees their machine that has all the inputs where they need them, has all the outputs where they need them. But it allows them to have that consistency. And I could duplicate that as many times as I want to. And especially for those short form type projects, it's perfect for. Being on the air for 24/7 for a month, that's a question you and your CFO need to answer. That's that whether or not it's really worth it at that point. With all, and you have to weigh all those different things. You have to weigh I have the resiliency of the internet, I have the resiliency of AWS or Azure or Google Cloud being literally in their own infrastructure that is their own world, and they have that back end all taken care of that I don't have to worry about. So how much does that take away from doing it on-prem or in a data center? To me, it's very valuable. So I find it beneficial, but the hard part is managing those costs. And depending on how long you're doing, like Jeff, it does a little bit different than what I do, but in the event world, for sure, I have to look at that. If I'm going to be out there for a week doing a show, I need to manage those costs a little bit harder than if it's just a one-day show.
Yep.
Maxim, your final thoughts, recommendations. What do you want the audience to take with them from this session? What's your final words?
Well, when you move from DC, rethink your architectural thoughts, rethink the models, take advantage of whatever cloud provider you go to, they have to offer, and really, kind of engineer for the cloud. I think that's my final not engineer for with a different mindset, just for the cloud. You'll take advantage of it immensely and you'll benefit from it.
You use the cloud and not just move your compute.
Correct. They take advantage of it. It's available to you whether you like it or not.
Jeff Malkin, what's your key advice for the audience to bring home after this panel?
Well, as the great John Lennon once said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans, right? So it's you can you can plan it out, and it ain't gonna happen that way. So it's about working with vendors or building platforms yourself that have that architecture that can swiftly, nimbly adapt to the ever-changing requirements and issues that are going to happen that you can't foresee at this moment. So, ideally you're working with a vendor that has an API-based platform that is, managing hardware and software and tools for you so that you can simply update your job payloads to take advantage of the latest and greatest and solve those issues. But they will happen, they will occur. So there's many advantages of migrating to the cloud, whether building yourself or using a vendor, but do so knowing that it's going to continually evolve much more rapid than what you're used to.
Excellent. I think we rounded off exactly on time. And by that, I think I'll leave it back to Eric.
Wonderful. Thank you, Magnus. And thank you, Jeff and Maxim. That was a terrific discussion. We had some questions in the Q&A that we didn't get a chance to get to. We will forward those to the panelists, and hopefully they can answer them offline. And we have a winner for the Amazon gift card, and the winner is Margot Kelly. Margot, you will be getting an email from us letting you know all the details about that soon. That wraps it up for this session. Thanks again to Limelight Networks for sponsoring and Encoding.com for sponsoring this session. We've got 30 minutes until the next one. Take a half hour to listen to some Rolling Stones, RIP Charlie Watts, and we'll see you then to talk about artificial intelligence for encoding.